Don't worry, Browns fans. Reinforcements are on their way. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So after the draft, it was pretty obvious that the Browns' biggest need was wide receiver help. Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, David Bell, Jamari Thrash, Michael Woods, DeAndre Carter, and Cassis Davis. That's the list of wide receivers that were on the Browns roster. Not exactly much star power, shall we say. In fact, outside of Jeudy and Carter, all the other receivers on the roster had a combined 106 career receptions. I mean, Carter is a return specialist and only has 117 receptions. So not only is there, not that much star power, not that much experience, NFL experience in that room either. So, in my opinion, the Browns had a bigger need at running back than they did at wide receiver heading into the draft. And the team clearly felt the same, drafting 2 running backs and, of course, no wide receivers. I expected them to at least draft 1 receiver and joked about, how they always do. But in the end, this did become the first draft under this regime where they did not, in fact, draft a wide receiver. For anyone wondering why I had running back as a bigger need, the Browns' identity under Kevin Stefanski has been, running the ball. As much as people on Twitter will complain, that he didn't run the ball enough. Stefanski's offense consistently ranked in the top 5 in rushing attempts. It was, of course, a luxury to have Nick Chubb running the ball during those years, of course. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, the Browns' biggest offensive struggles under Stefanski have come over the last few seasons where the Browns have had no run game, obviously corresponding with the injuries to Nick Chubb. The Browns had to overhaul this running back room and bring fresh talent in, even more so than they needed to, draft a wide receiver high. That's just how I felt heading into the draft. That doesn't mean, I'd have been against them taking guys that I liked at certain spots. I would have been fine with them taking Burden, early in the second, and was actually advocating for them to take Ayumano in the 4th round after the board fell the way it did. Also, part of the reason I had this outlook was because I assumed the Browns would look to target wide receiver, via free agency or a trade for a player. The Browns have a bunch of young guys that they've drafted in that room. It feels like they need more of a veteran presence, in my opinion, and that is, of course, what the Browns have ended up doing, and have signed a free agent wide receiver this week. So get excited, Browns fans, because Diontae Johnson is a Cleveland... I can't even say it with a straight face. All jokes aside, it is what it is. As long as the money is nothing more than around the veterans minimum, maybe a little bit more, then it's fine. I don't love it. This will be Diontae Johnson's 5th team in 12 months. So I'm going to assume he's clearly had some kind of attitude or work ethic commitment problems. He is talented. He had over 700 yards and 5 touchdowns in 11 starts 2 seasons ago for Pittsburgh before, of course, the kind of train wreck 2024 season that he had. AB and this front office have shown that they are willing to take flyers on disgruntled, shall we say, former Pro Bowlers. In this case, a former second-team All-Pro as well, I think. Worst case with these kind of moves, you cut them, it didn't really cost you much. Best case, you get a contributor to your team. So I do understand, the idea of taking a flyer on a Diontae Johnson, as much as it would not have been my first option, let alone my 10th option, shall we say. Who knows? Maybe it works out. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, it's the Browns, so it probably doesn't. But still, you never know. Um, I do think he is quite a misunderstood player with some of the reaction that I've seen to obviously the signing. I think he's quite misunderstood in regards to how he plays. And no, I don't mean as in just plays bad. But, a lot of guys do think that he's a slot guy because he's slightly on the smaller side when, in reality, he was the Steelers' number one X receiver over his last few years with the team. In 2023, he played 78% of his snaps on the outside. And in 2022, that number was actually at 87%. So he would, fit what the Browns need at receiver if he is able to, contribute as someone who can win on the outside. Judy can do it, of course, but he does like to do most of his work. Well, I say most, more of his work in the inside. Diontae, as I said, it's not an exciting move. The guy's been on 5 teams in 12 months. I'm not even sure I can remember that happening with any player before, that they were on 5 teams in that short of amount of time. Obviously, there was a reason for that. We will find out, I'm sure, pretty soon if that reason follows him here to Cleveland as well. If he doesn't make it through training camp, then we clearly know why. The same reason it's not worked out at those other teams. But, it was an odd situation, obviously, that resulted in the trade to Carolina. Let's be real, Carolina at that time was not a great situation. Maybe that was something that kind of, made him fall out of love a little bit with the game. Maybe that kind of gave him a hit. He took a hit from that. And what transpired, in the following season and months was a result of that. That's the optimistic approach, and that he can kind of, he's moved on from that. He's ready to, prove that he can still do it in the NFL. The Browns would be happy to obviously reap the benefits of that. Yes, it's probably doubtful that is the case. But as I said, the Browns, they're prone to making these kind of moves because in the end of the day, you get in a player that the talent was there, obviously other reasons that led to him being available for what I assume is going to be quite cheap. So if that is the case, they brought him in on a 1-year, couple of million. Why not? It's a flyer. They needed bodies in the room, let alone players and contributors in the room. So take a flyer on Diontae Johnson. I don't love it. Of course I don't. I don't think you would love it. I don't think anyone listening would love it. But as I said, it's a flyer on someone that, was talented. You assume still is talented. Made a Pro Bowl, made a second team All-Pro, and can contribute, in a role that I think the Browns are crying out for, which is, someone a true X receiver on the outside. Bringing it back to what my assumptions were with the Browns' plans at wide receiver, Elijah Moore was a name that came up multiple times as the more time passed, and he still didn't have a team. And his name came up again this week, but in more disappointing news. He had visited the Buffalo Bills, who on paper desperately needed a wide receiver, well, still do need a wide receiver, just as much as the Browns do. So the prospect of re-signing him started to appear less likely, shall we say, as a move that, would make sense for both parties involved. I mean, the Bills get an actual competent wide receiver, and Elijah Moore gets the catch passes from Josh Allen. Who would not want to do that? However, in an almost retaliatory move, the Browns decided to respond by placing the very rarely used unrestricted free agent tender on Elijah Moore. We've only seen a handful of examples of this really being used by teams over the last decade. The most recent example was 2022, when the Chiefs and Ravens used it for Melvin Ingram and Justin Houston, respectively. Essentially what the tender means is that if Elijah Moore is to sign with another team before the 22nd of July, then the signing would be added to the kind of comp pick formula that they do. I'd say it's probably more unlikely than likely, but there is a chance that a team would have to give up a pick if they were to sign more. That does, of course, add an extra caveat to signing him and, could potentially deter some teams from doing so. If Moore doesn't sign with another team before the 22nd of July, then he would automatically be re-signed as part of the tender to a one-year deal with the Browns, which I think is 110% of their previous year's salary, which for Moore would be at $3.42 million, which he's unable to negotiate around. So this basically gives teams a floor on how much they would have to pay Moore, and provides a deadline for Moore to sign elsewhere. So whilst it's not massively significant in regards to other teams, negotiating prospects with Moore, I think it does give the Browns a better chance of not only re-signing him, but doing so at a very reasonable number. As I said, it may not be that significant, but it is something, and there's usually nothing in the way when it comes to signing a free agent. Other than obviously all the things with them wanting money, but in terms of outside influences in the way, this tender is rarely used, so it is not something teams are really used to dealing with in the whole kind of player acquisition department. So, if we look at those two recent examples that I mentioned, Justin Houston ended up signing his tender with the Ravens, whereas Melvin Ingram did actually sign with another team before the tender deadline, and I couldn't find out whether or not they gave up a pick for that. So it really is a flip of a coin for whether or not it has any true impact. We'll have to wait and see. But, focusing on the actual idea of re-signing Moore, I would do it, especially at that number, just $3.42 million. I think that is good value for Elijah Moore. He wasn't outstanding by any means, but, he's a decent wide receiver. He's a talented wide receiver. He had a knack of making plays for the Browns. I mean, he had one of the greatest plays in Cleveland Browns history, with the butt cheek catch against the Rams in 2023, I believe it was, which, all-time moment, one of the most hilarious calls that we've ever seen on a broadcast. I can't remember who the ref was, but, to hear them basically come on there and say, the guy is in bounds because of his butt cheek, was pretty hilarious. Definitely an all-time moment. As I said, not outstanding, but over 500 yards in both his seasons with the Browns, 640 in 2023, 538 in 2024. He had a knack, as I said, of making plays when plays needed to be made. He came from a situation where he played with multiple quarterbacks in New York to them playing for multiple quarterbacks for the Browns during their kind of, quarterback debacle over the last few years. So, there is an argument to be made there that he's not really been given a fair shot in his career with all the kind of QB carousel he's had to work with, and all the different guys that he's had to get used to, throwing him the ball. I said multiple times towards the end of last season that I'd re-sign him if the number was right, and this number is certainly right. So hopefully, best case scenario, no team signs him. We get to July 2022. Why did I say 2022? We get to July the 22nd. No one has signed him. Browns then, he becomes a Cleveland Brown, 1 year, $3.42 million. I think that is great value for Elijah Moore. I would definitely do that. I would sign me up today. I would bring him in for that amount of money. He was never going to get loads of money. It is going to be a prove-it deal for him. Most teams probably view him at best as a wide receiver too, maybe as a third option. So, he was never going to get crazy money. But as I said, I just think with, he's got a familiarity with the system, with the coaches, with the players. He knows this offense. He knows how he's going to be, it just all of those things for that amount of money. and for what he can contribute on the field, I think that's a no-brainer. So as I said, hopefully it gets to the 22nd of July and no team has signed him, and that exclusive free agent tender that the Browns placed on him activates and he becomes a Cleveland Brown for one more year at least. To kind of wrap it up, the Browns were crying out for wide receiver help, and they at least have some reinforcements. Would I like them to target maybe one more veteran? Most definitely. Could they trade for another star receiver? You never know. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns wide receiver room next year, for week one, was Jerry Jeudy, Diontae Johnson, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, David Bell, and Jamari Fresh. It's not the greatest wide receiver in the world, but at least, I won't have to suit up for game days. Something I was worried about when looking at the Browns wide receiver room before these moves. But Diontae Johnson signed to a one-year deal. Haven't had the full breakdown of the contract yet. I'm not entirely sure what the amount is. I expect it to be pretty low. I hope it to be pretty low, around that couple million range. And obviously we'll have to wait and see on Elijah Moore. I do apologise for this. I know, this news came out a couple of days ago, 2 or 3 days ago now. But unfortunately I was away with work, was unable to get anything recorded yesterday. I know the Cleveland Browns still aren't paying me to do this. It is ridiculous. I completely agree. But that will do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means only getting to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing rest of the week, but most importantly, go Browns.